James had always believed the lake behind his home was more than just water. To him, it was a sanctuary. On early mornings, he would quietly take his small wooden boat out, drifting across the calm surface while the world still slept. The ripples that followed him were gentle, soothing, like nature itself was breathing with him. It was his favorite escape from the noise of everyday life. But that peace shattered the day he received the letter. The envelope carried the HOA's seal, stamped with authority. James opened it casually, expecting some generic reminder about landscaping or trash schedules. Instead, his eyes froze on the bold words, "Remove your boat immediately. It is causing disturbances and unnecessary ripples on the lake." At first, James thought it was a joke. Ripples? Since when had ripples become a violation? But as he read further, he saw the warnings, fines, penalties, and possible legal action if he failed to comply. The absurdity made him laugh, yet beneath that laugh was frustration. How could an HOA dictate something as natural as water movement? James tucked the letter away, but he couldn't shake the irritation. The lake wasn't some decorative fountain. It was a living body of water, one that had been there long before the HOA existed. Something inside James told him this wasn't just about a boat. It was about control, and he had no intention of giving up his peace so easily. Days turned into weeks, and the HOA's demands didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder, sharper, and more invasive. New letters arrived, each more threatening than the last. They accused James of disturbing wildlife, disrupting the neighborhood aesthetic, and even suggested that his boat might lower property values. Neighbors started whispering. Some looked at James differently, wondering if he truly was breaking rules. Others simply avoided him, afraid of drawing the HOA's attention. James noticed the subtle shift. He was becoming an outsider in his own community. But the HOA didn't stop at words. They began adding fines to his account, charges that grew heavier with each passing week. They even sent members to take pictures of his boat as evidence. To the board, James was just another homeowner they could pressure into compliance. What they didn't realize was that James wasn't just another homeowner. Years ago, long before the HOA had expanded its influence, James had purchased the lake and its water rights directly from the original landowner. It was a quiet deal, something he kept to himself, because he never needed to use it. To him, the lake was for peace, not power. But as the HOA pushed harder, James began to feel the weight of that ownership. He wasn't powerless. In fact, he held the strongest card of all. Frustration turned to determination as James pulled out his old files. One evening, he set his study table with boxes of documents, the air heavy with dust and memories. He carefully flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for: the deed. The paper was worn but clear, stamped and signed by officials. It confirmed in legal terms that the lake and all rights tied to it belonged to him. Reading those lines gave James a renewed sense of confidence. He realized every kayak, every fishing trip, every HOA event hosted on the water had technically been happening on his property. They had been trespassing without even knowing it. The irony made him smile. The same HOA accusing him of disturbing the lake had no authority over it at all. It wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It was about standing up for himself. The HOA had tried to bully him with rules, but now he held proof that their power stopped at the shoreline. James felt a fire inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was time to remind the HOA who really controlled the lake. The next HOA meeting was packed. Board members sat with their usual stern expressions, ready to enforce their rules. Homeowners filled the chairs, curious about the drama surrounding James and his boat. As whispers moved through the crowd, James walked in quietly, holding a folder under his arm. When the board tried to bring up his violations, James stood up calmly. His voice was steady as he explained, "Before you continue, I think there's something everyone here should see." He opened the folder and placed the deed on the table for all to view. At first, there was silence. then gasps. Some neighbors leaned forward, squinting at the signatures and seals. The document was undeniable. The lake wasn't HOA property. It was James's. Every attempt they had made to fine him, every demand to move his boat, had no legal ground. The board members' faces shifted from arrogance to shock. Their authority had vanished in an instant. James didn't raise his voice or gloat. Instead, he calmly stated the truth. "This lake belongs to me, and every time the HOA has used it without permission, it's been trespassing." The room erupted with murmurs. For once, it wasn't James who looked like the rule breaker, it was the HOA. From that day forward, everything changed. The HOA had no choice but to backtrack. They canceled every fine, withdrew their threats, and were forced to acknowledge James's ownership. More than that, James exercised his rights by formally fining the HOA for trespassing, turning the tables in a way they never saw coming. Neighbors who had doubted him came forward with apologies, some even expressing admiration. James wasn't just the man with the boat anymore. He was the man who stood his ground and reminded everyone that fairness mattered more than authority. On a quiet Sunday morning, James once again took his boat out onto the lake. The water rippled gently behind him, just as it always had. Only this time, there was no fear of letters, fines, or whispers. The lake was his, and peace was restored. As he leaned back, letting the sun warm his face, James reflected on the ordeal. The HOA had tried to control him with rules and intimidation, but in the end, they had learned a powerful lesson. True ownership comes with responsibility and respect. And on his lake, James would always have the final word.